Constructive Criticism is brought to you by our three amazing sponsors, Grey Viking Games, Oasis Games, and PureMTGO.com. You can find them directly in the links in the show notes and use the codes associated with each sponsor. We appreciate each of them and definitely think that you should check them out for all your Magic the Gathering needs. Now sit back and enjoy this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Constructive Criticism. I am your host, Spencer, and I am joined by two people that cashed the SCG, if I'm not mistaken. One person. They had daggers.
Well, maybe there's some equity. Maybe someone got a little like cash money handed to them, their dinner paid for from another homie. It's easy to say.
I'm joined by the Abe Stein and Mason Clark.
Hey,
I did that on purpose.
The is on the other foot, Mason. What are you going to do about it?
He's got the money, you've got the, you know, it all works out.
Who's the real winner?
So,
it's me.
This is exciting. You guys just got back from SCGCON, playing in the SCG Invitational at SCGCON, and we today get to kind of talk about that. That'll be kind of our main topic today. Before we do that, we do have Always Improving, our main segment, and then I've got a little bit of housekeeping to do. But let's do Always Improving first. It is the point of the show, guys. We want to be getting better each week, and I'm gonna go first because you guys got to play in a 200-person Magic event, but I got to be at home playing Arena and wishing that I was watching you guys play a Magic event. In all seriousness though, wow, that was hard to say. This week for me in Magic was really interesting. I was trying to decide. I got Diamond and on like Monday or something, but I had a really busy work week, and I was like, do I want to get Mythic? Like, do I care? So I got to Diamond 1, and then I decided to switch to the Phoenix deck that had recently done well. And I lost like 11 matches in a row. And was like, you know what? I'm not going to try and get Mythic this month. But it was really interesting, though, because I did end up learning a lot and actually have ended up playing that deck a ton more. And one of the things that I'm remembering about myself as I play more Magic again, as I keep ramping it up over the last year, is that I am the type of person that really needs to get my hands on a deck and do like quite a bit of playing and playtesting to really understand the ins and outs of a deck. And the current version that did well of Phoenix, the Dragon Rage Channeler version, is actually significantly different in my opinion than the Fairy Dragon, is that the name of the card, version?
Sprite Dragon.
The Sprite Dragon, thank you. Because especially when you consider your sequencing, like with the other version, you would pretty much just like wait till you could land. You would either turn 2 or turn 3 a Sprite Dragon, or you would turn 2 or turn 3, or you would turn 3 like the 3/3 elemental that Scry 2. And in this version, it's pretty different, where you pretty often want to be playing either a Dragon Rage Channeler on 1 or a Smoldering Egg on 2. So, and you're also saving your... It's also a very much a explosive iteration deck, where like... expressive iteration deck, where you very much are trying to get the most value out of those iterations and make it maybe the first or second spell that you cast on one of those 3 spell turns. And so because of that, you actually want to be finding 2 spells more so than you want to be finding lands pretty often, so that you can easily do that. And just understanding how different that is than like a Brainstorm deck was kind of a learning curve for me. So yeah, that's kind of been the thing that I've been working on this week. I did make it all the way back up to Diamond 1 before I had other obligations. But it was a fun learning experience, and I'm continuing to play it today. Continuing to play it this week. I'm all the way back up to Platinum again, and it's been really fun to grind the ladder with something that I think that listeners could safely say is not in my wheelhouse. That's me in a nutshell, Mason. Why don't you go next?
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, the Phoenix deck is definitely different too. if listeners haven't played it, it is much more like the modern Phoenix deck than it is the like legacy cantrip heavy deck. Even though some of that stuff still kind of carries over a little bit, but it is much different now. So it's cool to see that get some work in there. My always improving moment really comes from identifying what I like in cube experiences, which is a little different. So I have some other stuff we're going to talk about when we get to the main portion of the show today, but I wanted to focus on this because there's no real other time to do it, and it was a revelation I kind of had while at SCGCON, and it's that I really like crafted experiences. So experiences where like you are trying to evoke or do or resonate something in Magic. And so with cubes, this kind of came up the weekend because after day 2, right, Abe? It's all such a blur. Yeah, after day 2, there was a little get together with some people, and there was a cube, and I got to draft the Mutate cube, which is a cube that MTG Grindcast co-host Lee McLeod came up with. Basically, is like a battlefield kind of creature matters thing where you kind of maybe go a little tall, maybe go a little wide, depending on what you're trying to do. But kind of like creature matters, creature combo cube. And with kind of the theme of mutate and trying to really leverage and use those cards since people didn't get to play with them. And I loved it. Part of it, I think, was my deck was busted, but I really loved it. It was a lot of fun. And I got to like experience and do this thing. And it reminded me of something that I had thought about before, which is that when the Two Birds first dropped, Ryan Overturf talked about how his idea for that is there's not like a board game rule for Magic for like to have like a 2-person experience, and there weren't like rules and things crafted in that experience. It was often like, oh, this cube exists and we can kind of like makeshift a 2-person format. And I really appreciate the craft that went into that. And then I also played Lee's Artifact Cube on Sunday in the kind of the back hall where there's a bunch of cube drafts going on. And I also did a Vintage Cube, and I did not enjoy the Vintage Cube as much. Despite I think having like a pretty good deck there too, but having to get to like play with a cube with like the theme being artifact and like exploring that sort of stuff, it really made me actualize and appreciate how much that matters to me to have like a set and a theme and stuff like that, and like just good cards mattering or whatever. It's like something that does not appeal me in that sort of same way as this does, and I think that was a really big level up moment for me as someone who like wants to make more 2-birds and more cubes and stuff like that, and like really look into design spaces, like actualizing that and really coming not to terms with it, but like cognitive of it. I think it was really a big always improving moment for me this weekend.
Do you think that has to do with both your love for constructed over limited and also why cube style formats are your favorite limited formats?
Yeah, I think that definitely has something to do with it as well, where like I like that there's a structure to things where there's like a core principle or theme or whatever. And so when things are just kind of like blob decks, I don't super love them in limited, where I get that like there are things and people kind of pull together these like makeshift ones and they really enjoy that, but I don't enjoy that as much. And I think that having these like dedicated themes where like some of that stuff still exists on the fringes of the format and you can make it come together still, but like, hey, if you're playing the Mutate Cube, you're going to have a really hard time playing like a control deck. Like Collins Mullins was in the draft with us, and he was my round 1 opponent, and I think he had a great control deck. Like it looked like not quite as strong as the Vintage Cube control deck, but like pretty up there. And it's just like, this isn't what the cube's about. You made it work, and like that's really cool. But like a good version of the deck that this thing's trying to do is going to beat that. And I kind of like that. Like, hey, like you're supposed to do these things, you can go off, but like we're kind of having to have a curated experience here. And we're trying to like do this sort of thing. And I really appreciate that. So I don't know, maybe
that's awesome.
To answer your question.
No, I think that it did. I wonder if there's some self-reflection there on like the type of decks that you would probably enjoy the most in constructed as well.
Yeah, that's probably true. There are definitely things I do or would enjoy more there. But unfortunately, I'm a psychopath, and so I have to win above all else. So I don't know what fun is, and so if you could help me learn, that would be great.
It was really, really funny to me hearing you come over and like tell me this revelation as was happening, because I was like, yeah, like every time we've talked about limited, you say all of these things about it that I love that you hate, and all these things that these cubes are trying to do make it so much more like constructed. Wow. Suddenly you're in love with it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think those ideas and concepts are really really cool, and I think that like we even talked about it at the Invitational, but Lee Lee's cubes are so well constructed and offering that kind of experience. And just thinking about how you can make Magic do that is definitely a huge step up. For me, my always improving moment this week actually came a bit from just the ability to see the homies again and have those conversations about like Magic on like the highest level. I think that between the car ride I had with my friends Dylan Jealous and Kellen Pastor, Kellen wound up top 8 in the Invitational and is a longtime friend of mine, but just having the opportunity to like, you have a car ride and you're talking about, why it is you've chosen the decks you've chosen, or, how it is you approach certain matchups, or just how you approach preparing in general. Having those big conversations with people who you haven't talked to in forever, or, I got to meet a bunch of the Moto grinders who came out to the event, the young Zoomers, like Karate Dom, who also top 8 the Invitational, but you can have conversations with them about like how it was that they were thinking about things and, kind of getting a sense for who they were as people. I always find that those things really, they explain people a lot to me. I'm like, oh, I like have a better sense for what that person's like. But when I reflect on what they think and how I can contextualize it to the way that I think, that's a huge like boon of growth for me when I like find something that resonates with me from someone else and their experience, the way that they process it. So there's just a lot of that. Too many for me to really,
I'm so jealous,
really get into in just one segment. But it was really good to see the homies again, not just for the hangs, but also for just the love of learning about Magic and each other. It's really
Dude,
awesome.
did you tell some good beat stories?
Some good beat stories? I didn't really have many good beat stories. I also didn't really have many bad beat stories. My tournament was pretty polarized to just like
Sure.
Played a game and I lost. Played a game and I won.
I just want to hear a story about somebody walking up and telling somebody a sick play. Like, dude, I just made the sickest play.
I can give you a bad beat story if you want one.
No, I don't want that. I don't want that.
Okay.
There was pretty good.
It's a good beat story for Shikirani. It's part of the reason he's in the top 8.
If you want a good beat story, Will Kruger was very, very proud of a play he made with Hammer against Blue White, where he just like had the second Sigardizade and some other stuff he like really wanted to protect from the Springleaf or from Prismatic Ending, and so he like played and sequenced his turns in a way that the Sigardizade looked like the most valuable permanent, and then it was actually just a huge setup where he had the second Sigardizade and was totally prepared for it to go away, but he just like sequenced in a way and like thought about things in a way and like got his opponent to spend the Prismatic Ending on that Sigardizade and just felt like he was like 5 head about it
that's the best.
Forever. It was awesome.
See, that's the story I wanted, Mason. That's the one.
I want to say too along the same lines, because I mean I had a very similar experience. Like every time I talk to Mylan, that kid's just so good at Magic. He's just like insane, and like Abe was there for this one where I was like round 3. Yeah, it's like the end of round 3. So if you haven't played the Invitational before, it's a split round format, split round tournament, 4 rounds modern, 4 rounds standard, 4 rounds modern. Then you do it again in day 2, and then the first format's the top 8. But you don't have to submit your deck list until the first round of modern. So sometimes people will make choices and whatnot. And so like he comes over and he's 1 and 2 right now, and he's like, the first thing he says is like, should I play 4 IOK or 3 or 4 Thoughtseize and 3 of the other? And we're like, well, what's your record? And he goes 1-2, and then we're like, yeah, IOK. And he's like, yeah, for sure. And so like he swaps in the 1 IOK, takes out the 1 Thoughtseize. He's out of the burn bracket, right? And then we're talking to him, and he's like, I have to get a Hex Parasite because I'm gonna run into the Chalice of the Void decks. And we're just like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, you get Hex Parasite off your Urza Saga, and then you blow up these Chalice of the Voids with the Phyrexian mana. That like idea and thought has not happened anywhere. Like, no, at least not publicly, right? Like maybe I didn't get to see the mock stuff, so maybe that's something he knew from like Nathan or Phil Helmuth on Sam Rolfe on Twitter. And like maybe that's what happened and you learned that, but that wasn't my impression from looking at stuff. And it's just like, yeah, this kid spent like 10 hours reading artifacts. Everyone's playing Urza Saga, everyone's losing a Chalice, and he figured out you should play Hex Parasite. And like, it's like, why did we not figure this out? Like, Abe's like, we're talking about how we can't beat blue white control. And it's like, we just didn't, find the Hex Parasite. Like, come on. Like, this is the thing.
That's total gas. So,
Yeah, it's awesome.
I'm so jealous of you two. Like you haven't. The first thing that I did during my one-on-one with my boss today was like, hey, like I need to go to this tournament in Las Vegas. Like, let's make this happen. And he's like, yeah, like let's do.
2 weeks, baby.
That's gonna be me come post Vegas. I'm gonna be missing out.
So really quickly before we move on to our main topic, which actually is the SCGCON and kind of the lessons learned from there. Couple things happened. One, we updated our Patreon, and there's now swag for a couple different of the, actually I think all of the tiers have it now, as well as bonus content that will be coming. So a lot of the stuff will start happening in 2022, but we wanted to get ahead of it, let people know what's happening. Talked to our sponsor today at Oasis Games, and we talked to them about some of the stuff that we want to be doing, and what support that they wanted to give, and it's really cool. So I highly encourage people, as the I don't know about where you guys are living, but like where I'm living, COVID is completely flattened out. There has not been an increase at all during the month of October, and we feel like it's a good time to relaunch this and start encouraging people to support the show if you can. It'll always be free, but check out the Patreon. There's a ton of stuff going on there, and we're really excited about the things that we have offering. And I've already gotten feedback from multiple people. They're like, this looks really good. Like, this is some good offerings. So yeah, check it out. And as part of that, I don't have the exacts on it, but I wanted to say, because you'll look at it and you'll wonder what it is, or if you haven't been a part of them in the past, but we will be relaunching the Constructive Criticism Open Series, something that we only got to do 2 of before the pandemic started, and I'm really excited about it. It's something giving people an offering to play Magic and things like that, and one of the benefits is going to be free entry into those on the Patreon, so check that out. That's kind of it for housekeeping, unless anybody has anything to say on it.
Am I allowed to play on those again?
No, you and Abe are going to do coverage of the topic. Come on.
I thought I was going to do coverage while I'm playing.
Wait, I can cover dunk on this topic.
Yeah, like this kid doesn't even
you're
know.
You're both like, no, I want to win those sweet prizes.
Yeah, watch me play. They do this play.
Playing each other in the topic, talking about each other's.
You'll just talk smack to each other the whole time too. You'll just be like, that play was so bad, I can see your hand on the camera.
I don't need to see Abe's hand to actually know Abe's hand. I read him like a damn book.
Let's move on to lessons learned.
Abe's face for the non-video listeners was like, I'm calling that bluff.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, you can, Mason. Mason, I want to let you go first. And I'm really interested, because you said that you had some stuff you want to talk about the standard metagame, and I'm really interested in kind of how you ended up where you ended up on your deck list. I talked about it in the Discord when you posted your list, that I was really interested in kind of where, not just your 75, but like where cards landed in your 75.
Yeah, so standard. This is going to sound kind of weird because I'm going to say a lot of stuff here, but just stick with me for a minute. I think that the best deck for that tournament was probably Blue-Black or Grixis Witch. I'm unsure which of the two is the best deck for that tournament, but I think one of those two was the best one, despite Blue-Black Witch losing to Epiphany in the finals of the Invitational. If you look at all the win rate, which we'll look at later, it's just like kind of the best deck by a lot. And we actually knew about this deck the whole time. And despite knowing about it, we didn't actually put much time into it because we were a little lower on it, and we thought it would have some problems with actually beating Blue-Red, which it actually kind of does in the first games, but it just destroys the other decks, and then post-board, you're pretty good against them. But with that being said, I think those are the best decks. I'm unsure if those are actually the best decks in Standard, because the Standard format's over. Like, essentially, we have like another week of ladder, but in 9 days from this recording, Crimson Vow is out on Standard. So it's one of those things where it really depends on how you want to look at Standard, where I believe that when we look back on things, people are going to say stuff like the Witch deck was the best deck of Standard or whatever, like we saw it come out and destroy. That might be true, it might be not. It's going to be really hard to tell. I know it was the best deck for this weekend, for sure, especially with how things broke and whatnot. But at all time, I do personally believe and think it was actually mono green. And I'm going to kind of go into how I got there and everything right now. And I'm curious to hear what Abe has to think about some of this stuff too, once I'm done here. But basically, when you look at all the results over all the tournaments, Is It Epiphany won the 2 biggest tournaments through Standard's lifespan. It won the World Championship and it won the Star City Games Invitational. In the hands of Corey Baumeister, won the last one there. That being said, basically all the other tournaments had a large chunk of mono green players in the top 8, with mono green often coming in first or second place. And honestly, a deck being in the finals, it's like, if a deck's favorite is going to win or whatever, but like a finals appearance is very, very good and very, very telling for me. So when I look at all the data for Standard, it's very telling to me that mono green is actually just one of the best decks. So when I am wanting to play mono green, like when I'm trying to figure out what deck I want to play, mono green is the most appealing because it's the most consistent one. And a thing that I often kind of look for is decks that are consistent and are able to consistently perform. And blue-red has a problem, which Lear did help fix a lot, where it kind of run out of steam. It would have these incoherent draws, and things would just wouldn't always line up super well. I think that's why you saw the Goldspan Dragons. Part of the reason they left is because of that. They didn't lead to a cohesive deck in the same way that Lear did. And we see the Lear decks kind of be performing the best with maybe Goldspans in the board as kind of a juke plan. So when I built my mono green deck, I built it under the assumption that most grinders are going to show up with blue-red, which a lot of them did show up with blue-red. And my thought was that basically the narrative going around is that if you are the better player, you will win with blue-red because your cards give you so many positions to make decisions, and they're strong enough, and then you have this unbeatable late game. And so you can win in the mid game still with your deck, but you actually have an unstoppable late game, and since you're better, you'll get there. And then now we kind of have this arms race to beat each other. And I think it was very hard to beat each other. And so I think you kind of have to, you get in this weird spot where if you're going to beat each other, you're going to need to give up a lot for green, and the green deck's still going to be there because when you look at all the data, green's very, very good. And there are a bunch of people who just don't want to participate with Izzets, and they don't want to buy Goldspan Dragons, et cetera, which is a small factor, but a factor. So I built my green deck, and we can go into some of the more details here as mentioned. I'm done talking about like the big picture stuff, but I built it to beat up blue-red, and honestly, just to plan to navigate the creature combat part of mono green mirrors better than my opponent in game 1, and then sideboard and a bunch of stuff for the mirror. So if you look at my deck list, I have no Ren and 7's main because Ren and 7 is terrible against the blue-red decks and basically every iteration they have right now. I guess technically Jerry T's deck cut Fading Hope, so I would be able to beat up the Jerry T list. But besides that, Ren and 7 not good against blue-red. And so I had unnatural growth. I always call it unexpected growth. Unnatural growth as a 2-0, and I had 2 Primal Adversaries as my 5 drops. Because Primal Adversary is a 3-drop that you can play in the early turn that has Trample, and you need Trample to be able to push through the Izzet decks because they try to use the birds to stabilize for, like, the birds are kind of like a time walk on their own. So you want to punish that, and it gives you a mana sink that has haste threats. Haste threats are very good against them because they don't actually expect you to have a lot of those. And so I sideboard in the Ren and 7s for the mirror and 2 more Inscription of Abundance and a couple other little things. But basically, those are like the 2 big swing cards I have. And we can talk more about how my actual standard stuff went. But I'm really, really happy with my process. I think that I did a really good job. And the one thing I think I did poorly, and I wanted to make sure to mention at the beginning, is we knew about the Witch decks and we just didn't give them enough time. We probably should have given them a bit more time. And maybe we were supposed to actually pull the trigger on playing the Witch deck. Had we given it more time, that's unclear to me. But the green deck was very, very good. I was very happy with it. So,
yeah, I think one of the things that when looking at your list, and I was planning on actually having your guys' lists up while you guys were talking, but I got for those viewing on YouTube, like I got home 5 minutes before the podcast started and didn't have time to do some of my production stuff this week. But is it okay if I read it really quick, Mason?
Just so feel free to read it.
The listeners have it.
You're allowed to share art with the people.
Yeah. Wow. Mason never ceases to amaze me. He's so great. I'm not even in the right Discord anymore. Like, you just messed me up.
Heck yeah, I did.
Okay. So, yeah, it's 4 Mammoth, 4 Troll, 4 Pack Leader, 4 Blizzard Brawl, 2 Snakeskin Veil, 4 Chariot, 4 Ranger Class, 2 Unnatural Growth, 4 Faithless Haven, 18 Forest, 4 Sculptor of Winter, 2 Lair of the Hydra, 2 Inscription of Abundance, and 2 Primal Adversary in the main. The sideboard I can't read because it doesn't make any sense the way you posted it. I assume you...
That's because Arena.
I was...
Arena does the best of one sideboard, so it messes up. I can tell the people my sideboard.
Wow, I was so confused. Okay, so then it's... Okay, yeah, you tell the sideboard.
2 Taju Blightblade, which is the 1/1 Death Touch, 2 Inscription of Abundance, 2 Ren 7s, 2 Snakeskin Veil, 2 Outland Liberators. I believe I maybe last minute changed my deck list to play 2 Tangle Traps because Jerry T posted about Goldspan Dragon, so I think that might have changed from what I had there. And 3 Frogmoth.
I think you either posted that in the Discord or texted me that you changed it to 2 Tangle Traps. So I have a couple of questions for you, and then a couple of thoughts. The first is, so I agree that according to like my, so Mono Green is like probably the second most deck played for me, maybe the first most deck played for me. And one of the things that I really have found is that like, I mean, we start with like 4 Red and 7, we're down to 2 now. Like we're not playing like nearly as many of those cards. And I actually agree that it's been pretty mediocre against, especially like the Taking Turns versions of the Izzet decks. But I'm curious as to why that leads you to put it in the sideboard.
So, there's 2 big reasons. One, Ren 7 is really good in the mirror. Like, the reason it's bad against blue-red is that it's a 5-mana spell that's hard to resolve. Like, they're going to have Divide by 0 in their deck at every point. Essentially, Ren 7 getting its token Fading Hope, in my mind, is a soft counter spell. It's going to take 2 turns before I get that token again, and I spent so much mana to not impact the board. It's very hard for that to actually be a play that ever actually lines up and wins. And it often, like, Deal Force happened a lot, so you just can't have that card in your main deck. The other thing is, I believe Mono White to not be a good deck. I believe it to be actively medium. I think before this weekend it was the 3rd best deck. I think it's probably bottom 5 now of the good decks or whatever, but it's bottom 5. And the way they beat you is flying creatures, so you have to have Ren 7 in your sideboard because my deck left myself more exposed to them. But with the Inscription of Abundances and Ren 7s, you actually can just overpower them a lot of the time. Okay. Which I kind of saw when playing against Team RIW/Harlan Fear's Bant deck in the tournament, and like talking between rounds, it's kind of how those matchups play as well.
So my second question you actually already answered, which was about Tangle Trap, which has been like one of the best cards for me. My last question is, how was Blightblade?
It's fine. It's one of those things where
what can I ask a different question really actually?
Yeah, hit me.
Was it better than just having extra removal spells like the one that gains
Devouring Tendrils?
Yeah, Devouring Tendrils.
Yeah, I thought about this. The problem is your deck actually just won't have enough threats at a certain point, and Blizzard Brawling with the Blightblade actually very often lets you 2-1 with the Blightblade.
Sure.
And so while your Inscription of Abundances aren't good, I did have a lot of moments. So I played the Green Mirror 4 times. I lost the dice roll every time, and I only lost one of them in an insanely long top deck thing. And I very easily won game 1 just by like playing Magic or whatever.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of moments where I Inscription of Abundance and I kicked them, and my opponents had these big blocks. I just had the Blightblade trade off with the biggest thing, and then like they felt like dominoes. And it's not great. And I think that maybe in a world where I know a lot of people are bringing the Grixis deck, and it's not just the like Kellen and Stanley, which is basically what we knew were the people to bring it. If I knew there was going to be a lot of that deck, I might have actually sideboarded differently and had more cards for them, maybe the Mammoth or something. But in the world that we did live in, I knew there'd be green, and having that card, I think it's just pretty reasonable.
I lied. I have one more question. Knowing that you have so many 4-drops in your main deck, why are there no Florahedrons?
Well, it's a little awkward. So I have a bunch of 4-drops, right? I have 4 Chariot and I have 4 Ranger class.
Well, not just Ranger class, right? Growth is
Unnatural Growth is a 5-drop.
Oh, it's a 5-drop. Never mind. Ignore me. I'm just wrong.
No, you're good. Yeah, but to answer the question about Tangle Florahedron, it is bad against Spikefield Hazard. That is the reason not to play Lotus Cobra as well. If you believe blue-red is the deck that's going to show up, and I built my whole deck to get an edge against blue-red.
Yeah.
And then I played blue-red 0 times across standard, which we'll talk about later in some lessons and stuff. Yeah,
Do you want me to? Do you guys want to transition to Abe here, or do you want to talk about your lessons learned?
I'm happy to transition to Abe. I think that's probably the best
Yeah,
way.
I think so too, Abe. Do you want to kind of talk about where you ended up in standard?
Yeah, so Mason and I actually did like share a bunch of the same assumptions about the format. I think we thought that Epiphany would be pretty popular, but that I at least thought that the creature decks would show up more than they did, which I was very surprised when I felt like the field was a lot more about the Epiphany mirrors especially by day 2 than it was about the creature decks. I think I played against Mono Green twice on day 1, and then I didn't see it at all after like round 3, and it felt like the deck was actually just kind of underrepresented in the metagame, considering that coming in it was kind of viewed as the best like level 0 deck to be playing. And I think there's something to be said for like a part of the reason that it's hard to say what the best deck in the standard format is that we've gone through so many developments, right? Like from Epiphany becoming like the best deck, on top of Dragons being the best deck before it, on top of Green being the best, and then White having these weekends. But as things have slowly gotten more hammered out, and things have been eliminated from the metagame, like like the black eye twitch decks and like various builds of the mono white deck, as they kind of fell by the wayside, there's more room to apply pressure to other things. And I think mono green was like the last champion to fall in some respects, and I didn't really expect that to happen this weekend. I really didn't expect much innovation to come from many players, and there was a lot more of that Sedgemoor Witch deck than I thought there would be, and just more people willing to take risks. I played against blue-green ramp twice in my tournament. I played against
blue-green, not Sultai.
Yeah, just straight blue-green.
Like the early Aliantrazi deck is kind of what you're talking about.
Kind of. It was just it topped out at like Coma. I don't think it had its own epiphanies.
Yeah.
I played against, actually, I think there were only like 2, maybe 3 people playing it in the tournament. I played against both of them across both days, and there was just a lot more of people playing things off the beaten path than I thought there would be for what seemed like kind of a solved-ish standard format where people knew what was up with most of the decks.
I think this is like a symptom of paper versus online, for what it's worth. Like this is actually something that I expected coming into this weekend, and it is something that, and it's funny because like people often attribute all of this to card availability. I don't think that's true. I think people are more willing in a paper tournament to like buy the cards that they enjoy the most than just like they just happen to own all of the cards on Arena when you're a grinder. Like you just own them all, so there's like not a reason to play the best deck. So it's not a card availability thing. It's like I enjoy this the most. If I'm going to spend X number of my hours on a weekend playing a deck, I'm going to do it this way. And they will convince themselves that it is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that I know I'd posted my deck list in the Discord. I played Blue-Red Epiphany with Go Blank in the sideboard as my only black card. At the very last minute, I made a couple of changes to my deck, which were cutting my 4th Alaron's Epiphany for my 3rd Galvanic iteration, and cutting my 3rd Malevolent Hermit in my sideboard for my 1st Disdainful Stroke. And that was kind of a hedge towards this effect of not knowing exactly what was going to happen. Like on Thursday night, I was like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but I think I need to be more prepared for just the uncertainty of what tomorrow could bring. Like I don't know how many people are actually going to show up and play Goldspan Dragon. If a bunch of people decide that Dragon is the best deck, I need to have these Disdainful Stroke to have a plan against that. Or like, I'm playing these Go Blanks because not only are they a plan in the mirror that's very potent, it's also a plan for blue-green ramp or whatever random other mid-range deck pops up.
And you had made other concessions. Can I ask you a couple questions just like I did Mason really quick?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so you had made a couple of concessions. I think Thundering Rebuke over something like, whether it's Demon Bolt or like other removal spells, I actually really love Thundering Rebuke in that slot. I'm pretty sure that's different than what the Czech players were playing, right?
Yeah, it is what the Japanese players were playing. Okay. To complement Lear.
Yeah, I love it. I think that it's really good. So you already making concessions to Dragon there. My question actually comes down to a couple things. One, is your split on galvanic iteration. You only have two. I guess it's just the number of galvanic iteration. Where like in my head, this is like a no, you do have them. They're the windfalls. You have 4 windfalls. So where like for me, when I've been playing this deck, I've been playing them as a 3-3 split. And I'm just kind of curious where the number, like you've played this deck way more than me. Where do you land on 2, and is 2 correct just because of windfall? In all honesty,
So I actually wound up like the last change I made to my deck at like 11:30 a.m. on the day of the tournament was to cut my 3rd Epiphany for my 3rd iteration, or my 4th Epiphany for my 3rd iteration.
Oh, okay. That actually makes sense.
And there's a couple of reasons for that, and that's one, that you kind of have to win a lot more games now that the format has adjusted to, and especially like the highest end of the format has adjusted to the Alrund's Epiphany top end, and so like you actually need to copy your Epiphanies in a lot of matchups to get the room you need. Like in the mono green matchup, we were finding that you can't just be a little ahead and cast an Epiphany. That's not even close to enough. You have to be getting 2 full turns if you want to establish like Lier and a lock to get ahead of your opponent. So it became more important to me to draw 1 and 1 than it became to draw my Epiphanies and then figure it out with iterations along the way for value. And the other thing was that in my sideboard plan, for having my go blanks, a lot of the ways I was trying to win my Epiphany mirrors when they were just spell-based Epiphany was to iteration and then go blank them on like turn 5 and make the game about that. So that's like my free win in the games which aren't just more traditional control mirrors. And so the interaction with just the rest of my deck kind of makes Galvanic Iteration actually a very good card, as opposed to Epiphany, which was a little clunky. And so I'd seen people doing that. I talked to Kane Reinhardt about it, who had done a lot of work with the Epiphany deck as well. And he was like very sold on 3-3. And so I wound up trusting in it, and I thought it was really good for me all weekend. Having access to it was really nice.
I actually love what you said about the games where you have to copy Epiphany, but I think that more than that is true, that you just have games where you need to win where it's not just about Epiphany. It's about like gaining advantages where you can gain them with this deck, and a huge part of that is the Galvanic Iteration. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually have a great anecdote from my match on day 1 against Shaheen, where in game 2 I had like foretold a Behold multiverse and was just kind of waiting and was struggling to get out from under like a duress and some go blanks, and there was just a turn where he tapped out to cast Memory Deluge in my end step, and I knew he didn't have many threats that actually mattered, so I was able to just Galvanic Iteration the Behold multiverse and immediately undo his entire early game, and that went on to like seal that game for me very easily. And a lot of things like that can come up. The times we're able to iteration Fading Hope in the right aggro matchups, or iteration Rebuke, or even just casting iterations to set up your Smoldering Eggs was all very important. And so that card has actually kind of been one of the better performers that I didn't expect out of the deck list from where I started months ago to where I arrived at.
So before we move on to lessons learned, which I'd like to go first on, because, you know, as the viewer, I feel like I have some things that I think that I don't want you guys to steal from me, because, you know, I didn't get to play in the event. I am curious if you guys want to talk about your modern decks at all, or where you ended up.
I would love to talk about modern.
Yeah,
well.
Okay. I was hoping so. Modern, would you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I can. So modern.
The
modern
most popular constructed format in Magic.
Outside of Commander.
Is that a constructed format? That's a singleton format.
It's a constructed deck. Modern. So modern is a really big format, and I was surprised and a little frustrated by how much it moved in the last week. So typically in Modern's history, I think most people can back me up here, there are churns and there's metagames and stuff. And like if you look at Modo, a lot of times we'll see Modo decks, like because there's like the rental services and stuff, the decks can change pretty rapidly, and you don't have to buy all the cards in paper. For Modern and paper, that's not always the case, because it is very expensive to get a deck, like the deck that I believe was the best deck for last weekend in a money pile is like a $3,000 standard or paper deck, right? Like it is called Money Pile.
Okay, so what is Money Pile? Because I actually don't know. So I think some of our listeners probably don't know.
You put Kellen Pastor's deck list in our show notes as 4-color Omnath, which is I changed to Money Pile. I don't know if you noticed.
Oh,
that
I didn't notice.
Money Pile. Yeah, because there are actually like 4 different 4-color Omnath decks, and I was like, this is Money Pile. Like I'll mention it before the show, but forgot to. Yeah, so Money Pile, these are the cards. It is all the good ones. It is like Renin 6, Teferi 3, Expressive Iteration, Omnath, Fury, Solitude. And then you have like Eternal Witness, Ephemerate, and you play a Time Warp, and you just kind of outvalue everyone. You play removal spells and lands and Dorian.
Okay, so it's the elemental deck that evolved. I was actually gonna mention that on the show.
Yes, yeah, it is the like if elementals is too small ball and a little too clunky, this deck is like the evolution because Azorius Control a couple weeks prior had like come up as like the deck to play. And this is where I kick myself a little bit because I was like pretty high on Azorius Control for a little bit. And I let myself talk myself out of it. And I think if I had played that or for Money Pile, I would have ended up much better. I guess we didn't mention this. I 5-3 standard and then 3-4. Is that right? 5-3'd and then 4. I 5-3'd standard and 4-4'd modern. That's what happened. And so my modern win rate was like not very impressive or whatever. But anyways, there was a lot of big innovations, and the Azorius Control deck, I thought people just wouldn't play decks that would like run into the control deck, and then Money Pile kind of came up, and Money Pile just kind of eats the Azorius Control deck for lunch. And like there's a lot of reasons to not play Azorius Control at the tournament. That being said, when we get to the modern portion of things, Azorius Control is like one of the most played decks. It's one of the best performing decks. There was a lot of Azorius Control in the hands of that really like to play it, like Shaheen Sarani and stuff like that, who I actually played in Modern in round 6 when we were both X and 1, where his loss was to our good friend Abe earlier in the tournament. I mean, unfortunately, I get to get him another one. But Modern is really open. And so I chose to play Murktide. We talked about it on the Modern episode, which Spencer wasn't here for. But basically, I believe, and I still think Blue-Red Murktide is like the Jund of the format. And you can do things like play a lot of white cards, but I'm not a huge believer in that. And after talking to some of the Zoomers about it, they don't seem to be either. You can do a little splashes like we saw Edgar Magalhaes play just a Breeding Pool and Ancient Grudge in his sideboard. I talked to my friend Andrew, and he played a Hallowed Fountain and a Wear Tear. It's just only his white cards. There's a lot of things you can do to like get little edges as your Jund deck. And I think my Jund deck kind of Junded, and I played a little more poorly than I should have in certain rounds. But yeah, Modern is the most mid-rangey, grindiest it's maybe ever been. Definitely ever been in my time playing Modern. And it is just a fair deck format. And all the unfair decks are actually not very good against the fair decks.
Bro, I top-aided a PTQ with Lightning and Bloodbraid Elf in my Modern deck. You can't tell me that it's more mid-range than that.
Spencer, the best deck in the format plays like no way to win and literally plans to Ego to Ephemerate, pick up bolts and stuff to kill people. It is very grindy right now.
You know,
like like the Money Pile mirrors, our good friend Kane, he won his last 2 rounds of Modern at the Invitational 101.
That's gas.
In the Money Pile mirrors. Yeah.
It's funny because, looking at the Modern results, kind of like you mentioned, Mason, like you would just assume that Blue-White is the best deck by so much. It's one of the best decks for sure. Absolutely dominated. And it's funny because like when I was tweeting at people preparing, when I was going to prepare for the Modern episode that I had to miss, I was like, what should I play? And one of my tweets was, is Eldrazi good right now? And Mason responded, and he was like, listen, if you think Eldrazi is good, it's probably for all the reasons that this Blue-White deck is good. And kind of looking at that Blue-White deck, if I had been playing in this tournament, I would have just played Blue-White and Mono Green. Like that would have been what I played. Yeah. And
that was almost me, and I talked myself out of it.
Do you legitimately think you would have done better with Blue-White?
Yeah, I do. Fun little story. I don't know if I would have won so let's assume everything's the same until we hit Modern on day 1, right?
Okay.
My round 1 Modern opponent was on Black Green Infect, and they beat me game 1 with Gem Razor. I think I just would have like lost to Gym Razor for sure in the game one. Because
Sure.
like I would just like keep a Chalice hand and be like, I'm good, baby, and then they would mutate a Gym Razor and kill me. But I don't know how the like sideboard
That's
games go.
strong innovation for what it's worth.
It was very good against my DRC. Had to attack into it. It was very frustrating.
That's pretty beat.
Yeah. I counterspelled the first one, and they drew another one, and they were like Gym Razor, and I'm like, But you know, I won game 2 and 3. Thank the Lord for making game 2 and 3. Anyways, yeah. So I think I would have done probably better. I don't know. I have not played a lot of the Azorius control decks in those longer tournaments, and I have a problem where like I am ADHD and I do not take stimulants. And as like Abe and everyone can attest, by the time the 8th round is over in a tournament, I'm like just tell me where we're going, what we're doing. So I don't know if like the last rounds I would have played well, but the deck is very, very strong. Probably would have bailed me out of a lot of situations.
Abe, where did you land on Modern?
I wound up sticking with the old trusty Hammer Time, and I don't know. I think I kind of had like this is a little bit into my lessons learned from the event, but I had a little bit of an opposite experience with Mason, where Mason was kind of begrudging the fact that the format had developed so much in such a little time right before the Invitational, between Blue-White rising to dominance, then kind of being eaten up by Money Pile.
I wanted to play Money Pile. I couldn't at the time or rent the cards.
I mean, we could have gotten around that, but between you and me, you would have taken you might not have taken a draw on your fault, but you probably would have taken some draws in that tournament.
Fun fact,
it was just so hard.
I've never drawn in a sanctioned match of Magic. Did you know that?
Always first time for anything, Mason. Unless you're going to scoop a lot, it's going to be like
probably would have scooped.
So, so I wound up playing Hammer, despite the fact that the field was, supposedly going to be all these decks that are anti-Hammer, which is, what I have basically been signing up for, because I think the deck is just that good. And over the weekend, not only did, at least one player, I think, actually might have been just the one, top 8 of the Invitational who was playing it in Karate Dom, but also it, won the mocks. So, I don't know, deck's pretty good. But my kind of lesson from Modern and my feelings with Modern portion were that I should have reminded myself more in the last second when I was building my deck, and deciding on literally my last 2 sideboard slots. The same thing I reminded myself when I was building my standard deck, which was that there's a lot of unpredictable things that happen in a field, and there's a lot of things that you just can't be prepared for by name, but be sure to make sure your deck can play those weird games and have a plan for, the field. And I wound up playing against Esper Reanimator twice and Grixis Luris twice, and just all these decks I had not built my sideboard for. I had chosen to play Void Mirror and Seal of Cleansing as my last couple of slots to make sure I was hedged against the decks I thought were really good for the weekend in my mirror match, and these Solitude 4-color piles, and I played against neither. It was just you can never predict what you get out of Modern.
I was going to say, you're describing every Modern tournament ever, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I kind of let myself forget that, in the sense that I was making sure I was prepared for the matchups I thought were really important, and that I would be able to get out of the rest. But I definitely felt in the Grixis Luris matchups that maybe having a pro-red, pro-black creature would have been very good. Sure. And against the Esper Reanimator deck, having the pro-red, pro-black graveyard hate creature would have been really good.
Right.
And yeah, so it's kind of just a lot of Modern being Modern, and it's like that sometimes, but I think Hammer is still, an absolutely fantastic choice for any Modern tournament, and still does well in the face of all the decks that are hating on it. So
the problem with Hammer is that it is very skill intensive, and everyone comes hating for you. This is I tried to be a Hammer gamer, and it was just it's just legitimately very, very hard. And while you do get cans that bail you out, nowhere near as much as Azorius Chalice hands do. And
yeah, you're free. You have to earn your wins a lot harder, especially because everyone has a plan for you. But even playing against all these decks that had a plan for me, I felt there were a lot of games where I was yeah, my deck I still feel like I'm going to win this game, and I still feel like my deck is functioning really well. That's kind of just like where the modern format's at, though. That's like the hammer problem for the format, is that people are so skewed towards making sure they can beat that first and then beating everything else later. But hammer's still so good. It's just kind of what makes modern great right now to me.
I before I move on to my lessons learned, I do have kind of a modern question for you guys, or it might not even be a modern question. It might just be a tournament question. Do you guys feel like you guys accounted for it being a paper tournament enough?
Yeah, I think I did, at least. Like I was pretty sure there would be more money pile, because the difference between buying cards from money pile and buying cards for standard is I spend. So it was like what, $50 for a Goldspan Dragon. So I spent $200 on Goldspan Dragons for the one tournament. That sucks. Spending $200 on like endurances and solitudes, it's like, well, I have those forever. And also there's a thing where like people play modern a bunch, so you can like source the cards or whatever. And I thought there would be a good amount of it. And I think that like generally the way I build my sideboards in modern, I count for that a lot. Like that was not a problem I had that Abe was experiencing, where it's like I played against like a wide variety of decks as well. And I just kind of was like, I had games and plans for all of them, and it just wasn't a problem, where I had cards that would have hedged for those things had they come up. So
yeah, I don't know how Abe I think I made a pretty big error in not in like unhedging my deck and making those sacrifices. I think if I could go back and change my sideboard like back to what it was before I had written out my deck list and submitted and made that last change.
Sure.
Even though I thought my deck list was fine, I would.
Cool. So I have kind of two big lessons learned from this weekend. So I in looking at results, which is basically what I can do, and kind of watching player interviews, I kind of learned two things. One, that word travels, I think, faster than a lot of people like to admit when it comes to Magic right now. And like, it only takes one person playing against, a witch on Arena for it to get out. And so it's really funny, because if you had asked me what blue-white control looked like before the event, or 3 days before the event, I probably would have told you a significantly different deck than I would have told you right before the event, because I played against it on ladder right before the event. And so to me, like, my lesson learned here is actually to, if you see a deck and you see something different, to remind yourself to question why somebody might be doing something. Why is somebody playing this blue-black control deck in a world of Is it Epiphany? Because there was a blue-black control deck before this deck, right? It was a lure deck that also happened to play, I think it's the Serpent or whatever. Like, so the fact that people are kind of going all in on this particular game plan is really interesting, and I think that the blue-black control decks were a lot closer to Shaheen's list without the snow stuff than they were with the snow stuff. Like, I have played against the Celius or whatever a few times myself, and it's just interesting to like kind of look at, is lure duress a thing? Like, is that the thing to be doing? And look at that. And that was probably my biggest lesson from Standard. I would also say to trust yourself quite a bit. I had started to lose with mono white, and it was really funny to hear your comments earlier, Mason, about kind of the top decks in the format, because my top decks have changed. If you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said that we were in a straight up 3-deck format. We were in a Chariot, Epiphany, mono white format. And now I don't think that's true. I think that we are in a format with the top deck being mono green. I agree with you on that, Mason. Specifically mono green, by the way. I tried Teamer a bunch. I tried Gruul a bunch. I actually think that mono green is just better right now. I don't know that will be true after the news that comes out. As more cards are introduced, it's possible that the mana's not better. But now I think it's mono green's number one. Is it to decks at large? Whether any kind of Epiphany deck comes in at number 2. And in all honesty, like, I think that blue-black comes in at 3 and mono-white comes in at 4. You said 5 decks, and I could not think of another tier 1 deck at 5.
I think the Grixis Switch deck is better than the white deck. There's a version of the deck that plays Smoldering Egg.
Oh,
and Experimental Frenzy. That's so. Here's what
Experimental Frenzy is not.
No, it plays
Expressive
Iteration.
Exactly.
The other red draw spell.
Yeah.
Both unbeatable red draw spells.
Okay.
Yeah. So the deck that everyone's playing is like a 3-week, like without deck one. The one that like Cardam played is like a 3-week-old version of the Grixis deck that Stanley played and worked on with Kellen. And Kellen played, I believe, the Grixis deck as well.
Yeah.
And it is just like basically the same deck, except you have one of the best draw spells of all time in Smoldering Egg, which really shores up your green, like helps shore up your green matchup.
That makes a lot of sense.
So
yeah, I mean, I would lump that in with the blue-black deck for what it's worth, and I think it's still. Like
I would just call it witch decks, but yeah, I agree.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think that's really fair. But yeah, I mean that really takes the deck that like I've been championing on this podcast down quite a bit, right? Like, I mean, I've been saying like, you know, to be fair, I still think that if people play Paladins class, they're substantially better against all these decks. But yeah,
I think you would like the Bant deck, by the way. I don't know how much you looked into like the top 16-ish, but if you look at Raj Solomon, I believe I said his last name right. Hope I did. He got 9th or 10th. He went X and 1 in Standard, I believe.
Yeah.
And his testing partner, Harlan Fear, friend of the show, went X and... If you don't count the mirror because he played Raj, you went X and 2.
Nice.
So, I think that deck is also very, very good. And it looks to combine the, like, whites, low to the ground, Luminarch Aspirant, Redain game plan, combined with some of the chunkier stuff in green, and then a little bit of permission. So
yeah. So the standard thing that I learned there, and then the other thing that I learned is honestly just to when you go to a paper tournament, you know, and I think you need to expect a wider variety of things. And this tournament reminded me of that, because I'm pretty sure I would have made the mistake of targeting 3 to 4 decks in Modern. And in all honesty, I make that mistake in Modern a lot. In fact, I think that the last GP Vegas, that I played the Karn deck at, like, you know, I made day 2 and just lost a bunch of rounds just because, like, the day 2 metagame was way wider than I expected. And the thing is going into day 2, I was like, I'm going to crush this. Like, I'm in the winner's metagame with this deck. Like, I'm just going to crush people, and just ended up playing against a bunch of random stuff. And you just kind of have to remember that going into these events. So those are my lessons learned. But I'd like to get to you, Abe. Like, you've already kind of talked about your first one, but do you have any others that you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I would really just love to harp home the fact that people love to think in absolutes, and I, myself included, I love to think in absolutes about, like, oh, there's only mono green, only mono white, only epiphany, and that is very much not the way that reality works. You know, people will be winning with whatever. I think, you know, this is kind of like a more personal lesson learned, and it's not like a new lesson for me. One that I definitely experienced was that, you know, Magic tournaments are long and anything can happen. I was playing for undefeated against Grixis Lear, the last undefeated player, like in round 7 of the tournament, and proceeded to not cash. And that was, like, on a personal level, a pretty, like, hard set of pills and matches in a row to swallow. And that's, you know, kind of a reality of how Magic tournaments go, is that they're long, especially when they're 16 rounds, and things can kind of not go your way. But, you know, that was all a culmination of all the decisions I'd made. And when I was driving home and thinking about, you know, what is it that I'm taking away from this event? What is it that, like, what of my deck building choices should I have made differently? Did I expect the format to be too small? Did I, you know, not sleep on the comfortable couch instead of the uncomfortable beds at our Airbnb? Like, what were all the small things that I could have done differently? There's a lot to be said, but I think as far as the way that the decks were in the metagame was, there was just a lot of unexpecteds, and that's, like, the biggest thing for me that I take away, is that there's so many things you can't ever predict or expect that happen in a Magic tournament, and that's kind of what makes them magical. So,
Abe, can I give you some life advice?
Yeah, what's up?
Invest in an automatic air mattress that is double pillowed. I promise you, like, I just own one, and like people are like I just get to share a room. Like, if there's 4 people in a room, they're like, oh, like, there's no more bed space. No, I'll bring my own bed. Like, and I'm get my own bed. I'm way more comfortable. It's life changing.
Look out, 2024 SCG tour. Me and my air mattress are coming.
Maybe the Airbnb couldn't find some rocks and then
Dude,
put comforters
straight
on
up,
top
you
of
can
it.
just
Say
buy
it's
a pillow. Straight up, you can just buy a pillow top or sheet too that just goes over the air mattress, and then you have a pillow topped bed.
Yeah. There's a lot of technology I need to look into after this weekend.
Like,
I did not think it'd be that bad.
straight up. I promise it's a life changer. Like, I bought it to go to GPs, and then like COVID happened, so
It's brutal out here.
it really is.
When it comes to Airbnbs, it's
So
real
Mason,
brutal.
what were your lessons? Were they also to not sleep on the terrible beds and to sleep on the couch instead?
My back still hurts in that bed. I'm legitimately in pain all day.
Your guys' bed's really that bad?
I slept
I'm not
more
exaggerating.
last night than I slept the entire weekend.
I'm not exaggerating when I said that, like, I've never been so frustrated by an Airbnb experience, nor have I ever felt so like tricked. Like, every Airbnb takes photos and does stuff and like stretches the truth a little. I get it, baby. It's like a dating app. Sometimes you're gonna say some stuff that isn't quite true. Like, I don't actually love hiking, but if you look at my Tinder profile, I'm down to go for a hike. You know what I mean? We all make sacrifices and we stretch the truth a little. This Airbnb did it really far and then didn't want to even like step into the trail. It was just really bad, and like the heat didn't work properly, and it was a lot. It was
It's kind of a sick painting that you can find on Mason's Twitter.
Oh my gosh, a Mussolini painting. Anyways, yeah, that Airbnb was bad. It was a bad Airbnb experience. I also liars in the review.
Time out. You have to give it the CCMTG stab rating though.
The stab rating is high. We were like next to a crack house.
Yeah. The 2 houses adjacent.
So how many knives? Did you give it like 3 knives, 4 knives, or 5 knives?
I'll tell you this: I gave it 2 stars on Airbnb and gave it a public review of how things were. And
so like a 4 knife stab rating.
I don't know. I'm kind of guessing here on what a stab rating is about.
The Hindi stab rating.
The biggest danger was not stabs, but rather falling down the large, slick metal staircase, falling down 2 stories of stairs to your demise on a gravel road.
That's part of the stab rating, man. It's just the danger.
Yeah. The stab that alone, I got locked out coming back a little late on Saturday night. And when I sat down to call Mason and be like, I hope he's awake so he can unlock the door before I start banging on it like a SWAT team had showed up, I nearly fell to my death because it had been a little rainy. And I was like, wow.
I will say this, our shower kind of pog. I did mention that in my review.
Yeah, the
bathroom was pristine.
They should have put more points into the sleeping matchup, and their entire place would have been better.
Yeah, they put all their points in the bathroom. Just bad. Who's even going to play bathroom? Yeah, there's a lot. So, lessons learned. Like I feel really good about some of the process, really bad about other parts, and I feel like the things weren't congruent on like the actions I took of like trusting and looking at results, and then like thinking about the way people do stuff. And I did like a really good job in standard, where like I think. Given a lot of, if you run back that tournament, I played the same people a bunch of times. I 7-1 standard very easily. I do not think I beat Stanley on Grixis very often, but I think I beat the rest of my opponents. Where like my matches were all, the ones I lost were all very close and involved like some absurdity of error, like a comedy of unluckiness for me. And so it's like I feel really good about standard, and I think just abstractly I feel really good about it. And listening to people talk about their mono green deck and playing against other people who played mono green. Despite not playing very much for the mirror and spending like 20 to 30 hours playing against Izzet, I feel very comfortable in all of that. And so I feel really good about all that sort of stuff, but I should have applied that more to modern, and I should have played the deck that was a little stronger versus the Fearless Chalice, and just expect that like more people are just going to ram their head into the blue-white deck, and they're not going to like overthink it too much. And I should have just been like, guess what? You rammed your head right into me. Let's go. You know, like I'm going to crush you now. Or I should have just played Money Pile, which I also think was like I would love to have played if I could have got like 2 leagues and my hands on the cards in time. But it was much easier just to be like, life's crazy, it's busy, I have this blue-red deck. It's going to be like a real hassle to get everything. I'm going to play the blue-red deck. It's still very good. And that's like the other thing when it comes to like lessons learned is a lot of like not assurances, but like reinforcement of things that we had talked about some in this episode. Like my sideboard was built for like a pretty like silver bullety, like maybe not silver bullet is the wrong word to use for this, but like what's it called when you have the knife that does everything? It's like
a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, my cards are like almost Swiss Army knights while still being silver bullets. Like Mystical Dispute can come in a lot of spots, so I can flush a storm. I like things of that nature. And I think that was good. And I think I should have. The other real lesson learned was when it comes to like the playing, I needed to like slow down, especially when my head hurt. And I should have just like taken the extra time needed because I just played like very, very poorly against my blue-white opponent in day 2. And I just like lost the game. I think it's probably, I know, as Abe was watching it, and my hand was like 5 lands at the time or whatever, but I just like still made like an unreasonably bad play. I was incongruent with all the other plays I had made, and just like cascade of errors and stuff. And I just shouldn't have done that. And if I hadn't done those things, I would have had a much higher percentage chance, I think, of winning. And I like kind of finessed them in game 1 and just got a little unlucky in game 2, I think. And so it's like that matchup was definitely winnable. And I kind of just like played to try and like hit like my 1%er draw instead of just like playing a real game. I think if I play a real game, I have a pretty good chance to win that. And I can go for the 1%er type stuff later.
Awesome.
And I should just kind of like trust in my ability to play more, and not be like so down to take risks in those kind of spots. But the other lesson learned is like, I gotta get some Adderall. like I have
you could diagnosed. You could get a prescription. You're diagnosed with ADHD.
I very easily could, and my experience with Magic would be a lot easier, because I am just dying after every tournament. The other thing is, like, I think I am very good at osmosis jonesing it, as I like to call it, where like I watch, I listen, I take things in, and that's helpful. And I like should lean on that more. And I should have been. Like, it goes back to the money pile thing. Like I should have been more willing to just like watch Kane and Canister's VODs, like just talk Kane's ear off with a nice little dinner maybe, and just like call it a day and play the money pile deck. And so, and like just ran around town and got the cards, or like spent the extra money. And you catch me in Vegas, I'll be money piling unless something crazy happens in the next week, and I'll switch to that deck.
So those are our lessons learned. I hope that everybody gets some pretty good nuggets from that. We're going to quickly move on to talking about the metagame. I don't think that there's like a great reason to talk about standard right now. We've got a new set coming in a couple of weeks. As Mason, how long do we have? You tell me every
9 days. We have 9 days. 8 days because today's over. You have 8 days till it's on Arena. We have 7 days from the time you're hearing this as a listener if you're listening day 1. If it's Friday, you have 6. I can go on.
Technically, this podcast goes live on Thursdays typically. So
you have 1 week if you're listening when this podcast drops until it is on Arena. You know the whole set by now.
Well,
You've read my article.
Let's talk then about Modern really quick. So the list that they gave us for Modern are the XR1 decks. This is the first place list, second, third, fourth, fifth, 7th, 8th, and 17th place lists. This gives us, I believe, 3 Azorius control decks, 1 Grixis midrange deck, 1 Jeskai midrange deck, 1 Jund midrange deck, 1 Humans deck, and 1 Shadow deck. Of these decks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these 8 decks, because 6th place did not 7-1, have companions.
Companions are good.
Whoa. Mason, I'll let you take it away. You wanted to talk specifically about Grixis Death Shadow, which won the tournament in the hands of Corey Baumeister.
Yeah. Just for if you because it wasn't broadcast. It was standard for the top 8, but he did 701 intentionally drawing into top 8 with the Grixis Death Shadow deck, and this is I don't get it. This is the thing. The Death Shadow deck is very weak to the card Solitude. It's very weak to the card Teferi 3. It is not great against Chalice of the Void. It has, I think, a decent enough timing on Shark Typhoon and that sort of stuff, and is pretty good versus the rest of what the deck is trying to do on like a big picture level. That all being said, I heard Corey say against multiple blue-white players, as he was just clearly clowning on them by going 7-0-1, that this matchup is very good for me. And all the blue-white opponents did not believe him. And there were things like Teferi 3's getting hit off Ragavans that made some of this happen, and obviously like some fortunate draws. But I do not get the Grixis Death Shadow list, and it only cements in my mind how good Corey is at Magic. But there must be something to this deck, and it just shows how underexplored Modern is. I wanted to use that as a jumping off point real quick. And we can get back to in a second here, but yeah, I'm going to go back to that point in a minute after we talk about Grixis Shadow. So what do y'all think about Shadow before we talk about the underexploredness? Because
I think this deck list looks really solid, especially in Modern. You've got 3 Inquisitions, 4 Thoughtseize. You're already starting off with like the ability to play a Jund game. I mean, I assume that if we looked at Brad's list, who also top 8'd in 7 Wonder Better, that he's got a similar, like, I'm playing a ton of 1 mana discard spells. And it's true. And it's true that is not very good against Chalice, after turn 1, but that's why you play 7, right? So that you have like a 98% or something to have them in your opening 7. It's lower than that. I think it's like 80 something. But, I mean, I don't know. How else do you want to start the game other than like taking the Chalice out of their hand with this deck?
Mega Man.
Right, but like, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm just saying that even if you thought the Chalice, right, the deck just has like other ones, and there's just like other structural problems. But
what do you think the structural problems are? I'm curious about that. This list looks really solid to me.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry. I should say like the way things line up against blue-white.
So,
like I'm curious what Abe says.
I'm looking at the list now, and I also am like pretty skeptical of registering Death Shadow into a field of like Solitude being one of the most played cards. But I am pretty interested by like 3 Dress Down in the main, which I know has been like previously. Like this deck did make a blip on the radar, I think, like 2 or 3 months ago. One of the first places where Dress Down started showing up as like a card people should consider because it's so good against Urza Saga and against a lot of the pitch elementals. But if you think as Dress Down is like counter draw your Solitude, I think that's a little interesting as to how maybe that matchup swings. If you're able to just set up positions where it's a counter spell for their best removal spell, and they're like very committed usually to like at that stage of the game wanting to pay 5 mana to cast it. I also just think that, another deck that did go 7-1 was Logan Underwood's Grixis midrange deck, where this was a similar concept, but the only difference is that he's much more controlling with Snapcaster Mage rather than having Death Shadow and like the Dress Down stuff. And I think that just, I guess against this field, the discard...
He does have Kolaghan's Command main, though, for what it's worth, whereas Corey does not.
Yes, but the general conceit of like I'm gonna play like a discard spell Luris deck turned out to be very good for this tournament, and I guess that might mean that the discard plus threats is like lets you, when your threats are cheap enough, lets you kind of play a similar game to the blue-red v blue-white matchup that we had like uncovered when we were talking about what our plans were for those matchups, and so I can like see how it lines up maybe a little better despite the awkwardness there of Solitude versus Death Shadow specifically. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the fact that Jund and both Grixis decks went 7-1 or better, there's like something to be said about that just being good against the field that weekend, especially when you see this kind of outdated blue like Grixis Snapcaster Mage list also perform well. It could just be a familiarity thing, and also, Corey Baumeister's very good at Magic. So
the dude's insane. Can I ask you guys a question that I hate to ask on the podcast, but I want your opinion because a podcast listener asked me it. Do you guys think that Ragavan's getting banned?
Not a shot.
You both say not a shot. That's what I told them. I was like, listen, if they were going to ban Ragavan, they would have already done it. Like.
I don't believe that. I believe that a long enough timeline Ragavan could be banned, but it's
right like years down the line, right? Like it's like or a year down the line.
Yeah, I think you have like 365 days to play with that card minimum. I bought full art Ragavans like on purpose. Like I think that card's just not going anywhere.
It's funny because like if you look at the modern metagame, and we look at the decks that did well, while blue white technically did the best, there's a lot of decks in this topic.
Oh yeah.
It kind of is like I'm gonna get so much crap for saying this. It kind of reminds me of Vintage in a lot of ways, where like a lot of the game revolves around a couple of key points. You're resolving your key spells, whether that's Expressive Iteration or a Planeswalker, and then it's resolving your key spells, mulliganing, and then sequencing. In all honesty, it kind of is what this format looks to be about. And it's frustrating, right? Because for some people, because games are probably decided by like turn 3 in a lot of cases. It can be pretty hard to come back in a format like this. But I mean, you also have cards like Expressive Iteration that can swing a game for you. So if you have things that are leveraging your skill, it's just so much of it is about, did I mulligan correctly? Did I understand where things are sitting? This actually looks like my type of modern format.
This modern format is very good. It's very
The way that I've classified it is that in the same way that kind of Legacy for a long time was defined by the fact you could do so much with so little mana, a lot of these cards in Modern Horizons 2 are like exactly changing the gameplay to that. Like things are so much more efficient now, and the cards are trading so much more efficiently, and you're getting a lot more for a lot less mana, that it's more about lining up your pinpoint like cheap interactive spells and backing them up with your cheap threats than it is anything else. And so, or at least in a lot of the decks, like there's decks like Rhinos that go around that in other ways, or trying to play different interactions, or Money Pile that are trying to like outvalue you. But like a huge percentage of the format is the fair decks that are like, I'm going to play Thoughtseize, Unholy Heat, Counterspell, whatever it is to back up the fact that they're going to play these like very real threats on turn 1. And so I don't think Ragman's like going to get banned, because I think that's been good gameplay, and people who play Modern Art like that a lot.
Yeah. I should mention, I mentioned during kind of the introduction of the decks that were doing well at this event that 7 of them played companions. I don't know that we should really count Kahira as like
oh, it counts.
Do you think it does?
It's a free card for Solitude. It's a free card for Solitude, and then once you Solitude start 2 for 1, you take over the game.
Yeah, talk about that really quick.
Well, basically the blue white Kahira decks do not play Snapcaster Mage because they get Kahira, which is like a real get, versus Yorion, which plays Snapcaster Mage. But by having Kahira, you get to spend 3 mana and then get a card for your Solitude, which now turns your Solitude into like 3 mana, like Swords to Plowshares at no mana later, right? Like you kind of pay your 3 there. And then if you pick it up early, and then you're kind of in your opponent's position when they have to play around it, if you get to hardcast your Solitude, you now get to play your Kahira and start Vigilance attacking for 4, which is actually like a pretty real clock when combined with Lifelink for the blue-white deck. The blue-white deck will just normally not die from that point. So having a like white card to pick up, and honestly, like when the decks played Endurance, where they were like Bant or whatever,
that's
then
actually,
like having the green white is huge.
That's actually busted. I had not thought of just the fact that it just makes your Solitude cost 3 mana.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you combine that with things like, I mean, like the Money Pile deck does this to an extent too with Yorion, where like you want your Yorions to big flaker, but like if you pick up your Yorion and you have an Ephemerate, you now have turned your thing into like a 4 mana kill 2, as I've dropped something important on the floor. I'm not
gonna lie, man.
It's pretty real.
You might have just convinced me to start my Mana Traders account.
Yeah, I try to get you. I mean, I was very high on this blue-white deck 2 months ago.
I wouldn't start my Mana Traders account to play Money Pile. I'll tell you that. It's not going to be possible.
Yeah, don't do that one.
So, to be fair, if you would like more modern content from us, like, versus videos between the 3 of us, like and comment specifically on YouTube, and we can definitely make that happen. So we need them YouTube comments for what it's worth.
We have to talk about this though. because it's about the Corey deck and it needs to be talked about.
Yeah, go.
Modern is being underexplored. So the Grixis deck has been around, like Abe said, since the Hunter Burton Memorial Invitational. Hunter Burton Memorial, sorry, where Aspiring Spike played a list similar to this. It wasn't worked on. It wasn't really innovated. Corey just kind of brought it and did it. And we saw this from other things too. We saw Harlan Fear, who hasn't really played Magic during the pandemic, and people like him who haven't played, who came with these huge innovations. Harlan brought 3 Thrun the Last Trolls in his modern Rhino sideboard because it destroys blue-white. The blue-white decks cannot beat Thrun the Last Troll, nor can the Mirror, nor can Murktide, nor can Jund. No one can beat Thrun the Last Troll. There is so much going on, and Rhinos is arguably one of the most fleshed out decks in the format. It was one of the first decks we saw. Now, you could argue there's been some big innovations with Yorion, but specifically Teamer Rhinos, which is what Harlan was playing, that has been a big thing, and no one's done it. And there's a lot going on in that sort of realm, and I implore you to take a few more chances with things. Same thing with Fury and Murktide, not been done enough.
I love this Modern discussion, and I'm super excited to play Modern moving forward. Abe, do you have anything else to say before we wrap this up?
Not really. I think that like
my
only big thing that might be a little controversial is I think Money Pile is it as far as Modern. I think that is the last big step forward we're going to see for a long time, unless it's coming from like a brand new archetype coming up, because there's just not a better built way to play all of the best cards in Modern.
I got to ask you guys, there were 0 Money Pile decks that did well enough to top 8 this event, and also
one literally top 8'd. Kellen Pastor played Money Pile.
Kellen was in,
you're right.
Was
you're
in
right.
6th place.
Yeah, and
no,
also...
No. Hold on. I'm sorry. None of them 7 Wonder better, is what I should have said.
That is true, but there are a few problems for this that I think come into real life. So Money Pile's been doing... They drew.
Yep.
Also, it's a mixed format tournament.
Yes.
So, like, in the same way that, like, I'm unsure if we play out the top 8, if maybe Grixis Lurrus actually makes it across 16 rounds of Modern. Right? I'm unsure of that. That isn't clear to me. I'm not. I know I'm saying this like kind of like it sounds like I'm saying that it wouldn't happen. I literally don't know. It is a much different experience, and Corey started off with like it would be in a much different place with that, right?
Sure.
And like the decks he would play, and so it's unclear to me. But Money Pile is doing very well on Moto, and I think it is very hard. And I think Money Pile reminds me a lot of Azorius from 2 months ago, where this is what happened. I'm just gonna say some spades. Couldn't win in Modern. I was trying a bunch of different decks, and I knew I could always fall back on Murktide because Murktide was strong. And I know how to play Murktide. I can do that sort of game plan. I saw X-Files blue-white deck, which is pretty different than what we have now, but only like maybe 10 cards different. There's a little more prisoning. Like, wow, that's great. 5-0 to league, like 4-1 another league, played a local thing. I was like, this is good, but there's a lot of reasons not to do this. Whatever. Post in the testing Discord, everyone's kind of like, blue-white control, Garbo. And I was like, that's a good point. Blue-white control.
I literally don't know what you just said.
I tried not to be too loud. I was trying to be like, the blue-white control is garbage. Outplay everybody.
Sure.
Those decks are a little clunkier, which is true. There are some like real things there. But as we get better at blue-white and we hone it and we get better, I think that is a real thing. And I think Money Pile is going to be a similar way where I'm not sure if the Money Pile builds we see right now are perfect. And they will need to adapt as time goes on and things change. Like, for example, I think the Thrun plan is like maybe something that Money Pile could look into doing as like an answer to other stuff. So
yeah,
there's like a lot of stuff that could happen there, but that deck is very good. And the core shell of like good. So the thing about it is the deck plays all the best early removal and Bolt, most I should say, Bolt, Path, and Prismatic Ending, and Fury, and Solitude. So the deck plays like 20 interaction spells, so it gets through it all.
I just really quickly, because I said something that's not true. According to SCG's Twitter, Kellen did 7-1, but his list is not listed in the 7-1 or better deck lists.
Yeah, their
I
website
actually
is...
know the story behind this, I think.
Oh, it's because you get the game loss.
Yeah, so they were going to put the deck lists on Twitter, and he actually had registered in his deck list 4 abundant
growth.
He
got a game...
2 abundant growth instead of 4 abundant growth, 2 abundant harvest. And so it was actually while we were driving to dinner that he found out he'd gotten a call and was like, oh yeah, no, it's supposed to be 4 of this.
Wouldn't he get a game loss in top 8 though?
He did.
Yeah, so he did get a game loss in top 8, and it was assessed in his
But
match against...
Why wouldn't his list get posted, though?
Because they only found it when they did the deck checks and then were posting the lists. They looked at the deck list again and were like, oh, this says 4 and 2. And so I think that they caught it there and then never corrected it and posted it.
Listen to episode 400 of Constructor Criticism to hear the story of the person that literally literally lost 3 matches due to a deck list error at an SCG Invitational. That is going to do it this week. This was a deep, awesome episode. I have not hosted Constructor Criticism in a long time, and I don't envy you, Mason. Three hosts is so hard, man.
By the way, thank you, Spencer, for hosting. My throat is dead from the SCGCON. I've been sucking on halls this whole time.
I'm not gonna lie. I like snapped off the S, but I was super nervous this week, just because I haven't done it in so long, and 3 is just so much harder than 2. So I don't envy you for doing this every week. Something I knew immediately coming back to the show is that I didn't want to host 3 people. And so, but I snapped off the S because, like, it's my thing. It's the thing that I did for years. So, I just want to say that I was rooting so hard for you too. I don't know if you saw my Twitter handle this weekend, Abe, but like, I
did. Made my heart sore.
I love you two so much. I'm so glad that I get to do the show with you guys every week. This segment right here is where we would put a Patreon question if we had one, but we didn't have one this week. So if you want to check out those awesome new Patreon benefits, head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. We will answer your questions at the show. One of the coolest benefits that I actually didn't even ask these guys about, because it was one of the things that Allie and Mason had come up with, which is so crazy to me because it was something that we charged $25 for when we were on the show, that Mason and Allie were only charging $10 for, and I kept it there, is you can actually help us pick show topics, talk with us about them, and we will put them on the show. I kept that, Mason, because I love that. I love interacting with our most engaged listeners, things like that. So head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. At $5 and above, you get access to the Discord as well as, the Patreon question. So check it out over there. Really quickly, just want to plug the rest of the network. If you are a limited player and you're listening to this podcast, you should be listening to Sandbox Podcast. It is, in my opinion, completely unbiased. I have no financial stake in this. I think it's the best limited podcast out there. Also, everything I just said is a lie. I'm completely biased, and I do have a financial stake. It's actually great. Abe, I believe you said that you had listened to this podcast recently, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm now at the point where if people ask me what's going on in Limited and like how to get better at the draft format, I just say, have you listened to Sam Black's podcast? Because he really does just some of the most thorough evaluation of the entire format and really makes it very consumable for everyone.
We're so lucky to have him. If you want to get better at Pauper, you want to listen to Pauper content, I just had my meeting with the guys over at Common Knowledge. And if you are a parent trying to get better at Magic the Gathering, juggling time, Homeward Path is an amazing place to do that. And honestly, if there's a person that has gotten better at podcasting outside of Mason, because I want to give Mason a shout out, Adam is really improved as a podcaster, and Homeward Path has improved as a podcast substantially since coming on the network. So check out all those shows. If you want to find me, you can find me at Spencer13H on Twitter. I also do a semi-weekly podcast right now because my co-host is busy in the Need to Nerd podcast for the He's a Game Media YouTube channel, and you can find it on all the podcast feeds. And then I am actually going to start doing my deck techs. I don't know if I'm going to do them monthly or whatever, but I actually am going to be recording them in the Constructor Criticism Discord, where people can watch me record them and ask questions in the chat. So if you are a patron of $5 or more, you'll get access to that, and I'll actually take questions at the end, kind of similar to what Sam's doing with his Twitch channel, but I'll only be doing it for our patrons. I'm going to be doing a deep dive on, for those wondering, my next one will actually be on the green-red Shaman's deck in Historic. a deck that my win percentage is well above 80%, and I think the deck is completely underplayed and something to be really excited about. Yeah, so I think those are all the main places that you can find me. Mason, where can people find you?
You can find me each and every week here. You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. And you can find me at Card Kingdom, writing about a arena format. Right now it is preview season, which means we're talking about spoiler Oilers.
Is there a card that you're the most excited about?
Not really. I kind of like the 4/4 in green a lot, but that's kind of like a one of fun of spot. Yeah.
Card's sweet.
You're Captain Mason. You have to be excited about the called shot Thalia.
Oh yeah, I love Thalia. I mean, that's easy. that one goes without saying. I wasn't gonna bring it up, but yeah. I mean, Thalia's great. Like that card's gonna dunk on mono green.
And you do weekly Card Kingdom stuff, right?
Heck yeah, I don't skip weeks. I'm built different. I never missed a week. I've even written on the holidays, and I will be too this year for Thanksgiving. My article will be up same day.
I love
same
it
for Christmas.
Abe, where can people find you?
Find me always over on Twitter at twitter.com/morenothings. I want to give a quick shout out, since we're talking about the patrons and the Patreon, to Dylan Jealous, who joined the Patreon last minute to get Mason's mono green deck list and played my Hammer 75 at the event after riding down with me and had nothing but good things to say about both deck lists and was like, wow, I would have gotten demolished in this tournament if not for the fact that I copied those deck lists. He frequently was just like, wow, this Hammer deck is good. And then was like, wow, this green deck is also good.
Dude, it's the best feeling. It's the best feeling. If you want to see more of that type of content, don't forget to go to patreon.com/CMTG. One of the things that I wanted to make a stretch goal, we haven't talked about goals yet, it's something we'll probably talk about, is versus videos of the three of us, like doing quarterly versus videos where, like, you know,
bring it on.
We actually did once talk about if somebody like says something about a matchup that somebody else disagrees with it, they have to do it in the arena. We have to record it while the other host commentates. But I think that requires some Patreon dollars to get to happen. So we gotta talk about that. But thank you everybody so much for listening. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. One of the things that can help the podcast the most, literally right now, is to like and subscribe on YouTube specifically, and then to leave a comment on the podcast you're listening to. Comments on YouTube are really, really helpful for us right now. I haven't even told these guys this yet, but it is the number one thing that you can do to help the podcast. The second most helpful thing that you can do, other than joining the Patreon, is just heading over to like iTunes or I guess it's Apple Podcasts now and leaving a review. It helps the show a lot. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and we'll see you guys all next week with another episode of Constructed Criticism.